Hello and welcome to the webinar today. We have Mitch Stanberry from Warden School District. He is a mathematics instructor, and thanks Mitch for joining us. And he is going to present on differentiation through assessment. And so Mitch, I'll let you go ahead and go.
Awesome. I'm Mitch Stanberry. I'll just kind of share my little document here that I'm going to run through today. So you have stuff to take with you, because I know it is tough sometimes after school to be really incredibly present and ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to share the screen real quick here after I throw this in chat. This is just the document that I kind of put together for today. It has some examples of things. You can look through it, so you can access it again later if you would like to. I don't know if when you put the recording up, if you want to put that link up too, that's fine. I also, there's a little link up there. We were talking about I was reading some pedagogical stuff about game-based learning, which I thought was super interesting, just about where it went. I got the wrong link there, but if that link there is kind of interesting, it's about how effective using games in the classroom is for students and grade levels, which was kind of interesting as well. We talked about it a little bit before we started. So, but I will share my screen and go to kind of what we're going to talk about today. So I've been in a math classroom for 20 years. This is year 19 for me, but I did do student teaching. So I've kind of been in a math classroom for like 20 years. And I feel like the longer that I do this, the more I feel like providing like equitable resources that students can be successful on is really important. I'm working on my national boards right now, and I actually looked at my data at the end of first semester on my NOEA, and my kids just weren't growing like they needed to if they were kind of a struggling learner. And so like my big goal is like, how do I make things accessible for students, even if they're far below grade level? Like, and that it's been really challenging, and that's kind of really what I'm working for in my national boards, to try to help those kids that really struggle. But and then how do I assess them if they're not at standard but they're approaching standard? So what do those skills look like kind of before or the previous skills, or help them engage into things? And if we have some time, I could show you a couple examples of things that I've been doing lately that are kind of like, how do I teach fractions at the high school level, or how do I teach integers, negative numbers, because my kids really struggle with those things. But if I just teach it like an elementary lesson, it feels kind of wrong for my kids. I added a couple things for you here, just because there's so many digital things now. I would tell you that this paper pencil way that I'm going to show you today is not necessarily what I'm currently using in my classroom. So I showed you kind of what I'm currently doing. How this kind of rolls is, this is a statistics quiz I gave during kind of, I was out because one of my family members had COVID, so they didn't let me come to work. So I worked on a statistics unit, and this is actually the unit test for that statistics unit. And then we take the questions and look at kind of what makes up the unit, and then we make another test. And quizzes allows me just to pick which items. So we look at like, how do we differentiate for our kids, which items are doubled up, which items maybe are too rigorous or too easy, depending on what we want to do accommodation wise for kids. And then we make specific accommodated tests. So this is a 35 question accommodated test. It's the same as this 50 question test. And how it rolls in my classroom is I will put the 50 question test number up in the front of my class, but I'll hand out stickies to the kids that I've made accommodated tests for. But I'm not actually having to write as much because I'm able to just actually edit them and just steal the questions. So that kind of gives you an idea of, and I can kind of click on one here and show you, but the test isn't as long, but I make the longer test first, and then we look at how do I accommodate my students for these things. So this is a question about like how many students had more than 6 candy bars. But when I go back in, I can just copy and edit, or I can also, when I create a new one, I can use this thing called teleport, and I can actually just look for the quiz that I already made and then just pull over the questions I want. So this is kind of, for me, what I'm currently doing. It's kind of what my paper thing has morphed to, but I'm gonna talk about kind of more of a writing piece that I think would be maybe easier for other grade levels, but I wanted to show you kind of how that digital piece is kind of playing out in my classroom. It's made a huge difference for my students that are like EL that take longer to test. They're, I guess, equitably talking, like I want my students to test for the whole class period. And so if that takes one student can do 50 questions in that time period, but another student can only do 35, but they're thinking about math that whole time, like that is what I feel like is equitable. And the more that I do this, the more I feel like it's about, you know, how do I adjust things so that my students can be working the whole time at their maximum mathematical ability to continue to grow as an individual student. That's the goal. I don't have it all figured out, but that's kind of what I'm trying to do. Is there anybody that has questions about that kind of before I go to the other version of what we're going to talk about today? Or wants to ask any questions about those things?
Nothing in the chat, so.
Okay, so what I try to create here with writing assessments and how this is differentiated is this is a standard, and then I'm going to give you some examples mathematically of kind of writing this 3-question based idea, and the idea of like, what does it look to be approaching a standard, and then what does it look like to be meeting the standard, and then what does it look like if I can do a problem that's exceeding the standard. And so there's some stuff here that's hot linked. These problems were actually from jmath.org, which is the New York site that has actually all of their state tests and aligned problems to all of Common Core. So it's a great resource if you want to actually have some state test questions, because our state doesn't release their items, but New York does. And then I look at, like, when I look at a standard, like, what do the kids have to know? And so this question asks, what's the average rate of change of this graph from 0 to 5? But it's conceptually easy for a kid. This is just really counting. So a kid that struggles with maybe fluency in positive and negative numbers, and some of the things that really kind of get in the way with a more challenging one, like you see over there for level 4, it's not going to come into play with that approaching standard one. They're able to like just count. Can I count rise over run? It's running 5, so how much does it rise? And can I write that as a slope? Do I understand that rate of change means slope? And if you look at the test, I actually put slope in parentheses here because that tends to be a place where kids struggle. So it's just this idea of like, and I've done this webinar before, and some teachers that were like science teachers said, maybe that's a vocabulary box. Or maybe that's a prerequisite skill box. Like, what are the things that the kids need to know so that they can approach the math they need to get to where they're meeting standards? And so I feel like a lot of the work I'm doing this year is really in this box of level 2 of like, how do I make math accessible, but still teach to a standard? So we're not there yet. If we have time, I might show you, like, I did a probability spinner exercise where the spinner was like a half and a quarter, and then there was 2 slices of pie that were both 8s, and then it was like, what's the probability if it's green and yellow? So they had to like add fractions and stuff. So like we were still working towards the idea of probability, but we're working through fractions also. So there's this like, what do I put there? And then depending on where your students are at, like I direct them to where I want them to work. So if I have like an honors level class, we may not even work on the left box at all. Like they might just be working on the right box first and then working back to the middle if they don't understand the box on the right. Whereas with a kid that really is maybe below grade level and struggles, maybe I'm just having them work on the left box. And then if they get that one and feel comfortable, then work to the middle. So you can kind of help your kids to navigate where you want them to go. Because if you can do a level 4 question, you know, then you're obviously going to be able to do a level 2 question. The other questions I've had about this is like, well, what happens if a kid gets a level 4 question wrong? Well, a lot of times if you look at them slowing their work and explaining their thinking, like even if they don't get it right, they're probably showing you stuff that's kind of either meeting standard or getting close to standard, because those questions are more rigorous and have more application-based stuff. So it's kind of asking them questions that you probably will be able to look at and say, well, they don't have everything, but they have kind of most of what they need. So I could say they're probably meeting what they need for the standard. So that's kind of the interesting piece on this. So there's some other pieces here. This is, I kind of score them like level 2, level 3, level 4. So just looking at like what is kind of approaching standard, what is meeting standard, and then what is above standard. And again, I talked about this kind of idea of working from left to right or right to left, depending on where your students are. So you could have kids in the same class that are very different, working on the same assessment, but working at the assessment in an opposite direction, which I think is really equitable for them, especially if you have that heterogeneous grouping where you have really high achieving students with really struggling students in the same class. It's also, I found it really challenging to give kids different assessments, especially on paper, because they seem to resent on both ends of that. Like if I get an easy one, then the kid that's a high achiever, like, why can't I do that easy one? And if I get an easy one, then I feel like I'm not intelligent. So this kind of, by approaching the test that's the same, but maybe only doing part of it, I think it is more equitable for the kids. And some standards, a kid that's kind of in the middle, a lot of times they seem like they kind of are in the middle on some and be able to do the one on the right sometimes, and I will do the ones, and then sometimes they have to go all the way back to the left. So, and then you can talk about like which standards were we really good at, which ones was I only to do one box on. So there's just some more here. Again, here's a prerequisite skill, a problem on fluency, and then this. So this is all about linear equations. Here's a chart. Okay. Who's running the fastest? It only gives you 2 people. It's pretty straightforward. It's a straight division. This is a rate, which is about that's a 7th or 8th grade standard, but definitely that idea of slope is such a huge part of what a linear equation is. Slope's the big prerequisite for that versus a table which has multiple points and the decimals aren't quite as nice. This would be a really good like state test question for an algebra EOC or even the SBAC. And then the level 4 one is definitely significantly more challenging. And then I gave you there's some resources here about where I pulled these different things from. There's some smarter tools from the SBAC, and then I pulled them from JMAP. And this one has level 4, which is open middle, which is website about having kids kind of be able to come up with different responses. So if you look at this one, like it should look kind of the same at the end, but the answer should be very different because they get to choose their slope and a y-intercept that's not a whole number, and then decide 3 points that are on that line, which is a pretty rigorous process if the y-intercept's not a whole number, because now you're dealing with either decimals or fractions or those kind of things. So but again, those are linked. So if you clicked on that document and looked at open middle, it would allow you to go to those places and look at kind of those pieces. If you have questions at this point, I feel like sometimes I talk really fast, and without questions, I'm going to run through my stuff and then.
The chat is pretty quiet, so.
Okay. So I tried to give a little bit of everything here. So this was a deal about applying slope. And then I gave one about linear equations. Those match kind of pretty close together. This is a geometry example about right triangle trig. And you see this one's kind of interesting because this is actually a standard writing a trig ratio. But in order to do something like the level 3 one, you have to be able to write the trig ratio. So like this is a progression of learning, even though all 3 of these boxes could actually appear on, say, an SBAC or an end of course exam. So like that's the piece for me that I kind of thinking about, like, it's not that that's always a prerequisite skill, because this actually, if you look at SRT C6, this is actually a standard. They could get this test question, like write sine of X, that would be a SBAC question for a 10th grader. So it's not that this is always below standard. It's just in the process to me of what it means to be fluent as a student with right triangle trig. This is the prerequisite skill. So again, I think that's kind of the magic piece. I'm actually meeting with a guy from the ESD and our other teacher and our math, Tosa, and just kind of we're going to put together a project for our SBAC kids. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about kind of the both ends of this. Like, what does this accessible math look like for kids that struggle? And if they're like a special ed kid, like, how do I kind of look at a standard and then kind of break it back down into the pieces that are even easier and they need to have before I build it up to where they can get to where they can write this trig ratio. So like, this could be a whole nother box, honestly, like where this is maybe your goal is to get them to this piece. And then like, what does it mean? What is a ratio? What is a fraction? And like, you have to label the sides, like which one is the opposite, you know, in this case. So this could be a whole other set of boxes depending on what you're wanting to do and how you're trying to address those things. This is a pretty rigorous, challenging trig problem over here on level 4. But it kind of, again, depends for me on what classes I'm teaching too. Like if I had a class with really high and really low, I think this is a really equitable test. If I had a class full of students that really struggled and were kind of all pre-grade level, like this would probably be my box all the way on the right. And I would ask questions like, which side is the hypotenuse? Can I label that? Or, you know, those kind of questions that are prerequisite skills to even being able to write down what sine is. Like they need to know that that's opposite over hypotenuse. Understand the whole SOHCAHTOA acronym. So are the people that are with me today, Maggie and Sarah, are you math people? Can you give me some background about stuff? Sometimes I feel like I'm talking at you, and if I talk too much math and you are not mathers, then I don't want to like overrun your.
And you can put that in the chat or you can unmute and answer.
Hold on just a second.
Okay.
Too late, anyways. And then, so this last example that I just did in the same format again is this idea of statistics. So I try to give examples in kind of all the pathways. So like our SBA project, there's an algebra pathway, and then there's a geometry pathway, and then there's a statistics pathway. And so like this would be kind of a statistics example of looking at a scatter plot. The first one's just like, can I look at this and then write about the graph? So like our EL students just took the WIDA and they're supposed to actually discuss like, what does the graph show? They should show that it's as one goes up, the other goes up, which is called a positive correlation. Like that'd be a great place for a kid to be with this skill set. But if you look at the extension problems, excuse me, they're actually using the scatter plot to make predictions and using a line of best fit to actually figure out how many things they would expect to do if they sell 30 cars. So it's really, again, progressing from a kind of simple, accessible thing that every kid, I think, in my class could write something about this graph. Even if they struggled, they could be like, well, it's going up. And if we talked about the variables and discuss those things, even a kid that really struggles mathematically should be able to look at the data and make some comments about, well, as the number of, I'm having a little hard time reading those pieces, sorry, then I can talk about as X increases and Y increases. So when my X is smaller, then my Y is smaller. Again, these are problems from Edge Elastic, which is another test-based thing that you can actually get into and write very SBAC type questions. I actually just got on the new SBA interim stuff. There's some really cool stuff in there. I got my report back. It is way different than it was before. And I actually am going to use interims this year. So OSP, I would be happy to hear that from me. But I got some really good data, and there's actually way more stuff in there as far as practice tests and stuff now. So that'd be a great resource as well if you want to give your kids questions that are similar to what you're going to see on the SBAC. So again, the standards are hot linked here for you, and so is Edulastic. If you want to look at that, that is a kind of like quizzes. This is actually what our junior high program uses to give their tests. It's a lot more of a formal type test generator that does similar stuff to quizzes. Quizzes is much more gamified, I would say, and Edulastic is much more kind of looks like you would have on the SBA. But you can get in and actually search for things, and these items are actually from things on Edulastic. So that's where they came from. This is kind of interesting. This is actually Robert Kaplinski's work. He's a really cool, knowledgeable guy, has some really cool things called problems we're solving, but this is his kind of depth of knowledge idea too. This is, again, differentiation of taking the same idea and then making it a different level of knowledge. And if you look at his depth of knowledge, a lot of times we teach in what he calls depth of knowledge 1, where we're just teaching them kind of how to do the math. But the other two now ask them much harder questions, and they have to kind of understand what's happening with the numbers, and they're kind of creating. It's kind of, I would say, just much higher on Bloom's taxonomy. As I move up depth of knowledge, I'm moving up in Bloom's, and I'm applying, and I'm creating. And so this is kind of another way of maybe. And they do get much harder this way, but if you're looking for things to differentiate for your high achievers, like your high cap kids, this is a great way to push a high cap kid. I think sometimes we accelerate our really high kids with content really fast instead of asking them more rich things that make them a better mathematician. Like I have a high cap 7th grader, and I'd rather have his teacher expose them to these higher level thinking questions than just get into more math, because at some point you don't have to be that accelerated. You're going to run out of math to take at the high school level or whatever. You want to be able to have these abilities to apply and really think about these more rich math ideas. So that's, again, his stuff's here. He has a great website. He has great word problems that are really fun. And then he runs this site called openmiddle.com, which I pulled some of the stuff from there too, where the middle of the problem is open. This idea of kind of creating problems that have more than one solution. They kind of give you an interesting answer at the end that's very similar to what your classmates come up with. And so I have a little template for you here. If you're writing an assessment, here's my prerequisite skills, here's my at grade level skills, here's my post grade level skills or extension skills. And then just kind of, I put in this little tag here. I spent a lot of time during COVID actually putting together all of my digital resources that I found from everywhere that I did training and everything. And there is a lot of stuff here, and they're kind of all tabbed here for you. So if you wanted to click on that link, it allows you to just kind of look at, there's a little thing on all of them, but they're hot links, so you can go to them. And it kind of talks about if I want a rich task or videos or asynchronous teaching or all that kind of stuff. So I just kind of included that as a little special bonus for coming and hanging out today. And it's pretty handy. I also, there's your guys' stuff is on here. Look at this. It's the 3rd tab.
Oh, wow. Thanks.
Yay. So there's Stanberries, and there's this other lady that had all her stuff. She probably explains stuff better than me. We have a lot of overlink. And then your resources from what you guys presented in August. Look at that. There it is.
And I have linked your stuff to the bottom of that. So,
so there you go. I got 7 chats. So I would like to spend more time honestly with the people that are in the room if they want to ask questions or kind of want to just kind of figure out what they'd like to talk about or those kind of pieces. That'd be awesome.
Okay. We can actually stop the recording at this point since you've given the bulk of that, and then people might feel more free to just talk unless people are open to being recorded. So I'm going to pause the recording and we'll find out. Okay. So thank you for watching this part of our webinar. We are now going to stop the recording and let participants ask questions of Mitch. And thank you, Mitch, very much for this presentation, and love your heart for your students. And thanks for your email that you're putting on the screen. And if you have any questions, feel free to email Mitch. So Thanks
If
for
you-
being with
If you're
us.
watching this after I was here and you didn't get the opportunity to ask questions, but you do have questions and want to reach out, I'd be more than happy to try to answer your questions and help you out any way I can. So let me know. My email is on that document that's shared on the first page. You can see it here. So hopefully that's helpful for you. I would like to hear from you if you have questions. Hopefully this is helpful.